On the morning of July 3, 2019, a suitcase sat unclaimed on a carousel at JFK Airport in New York City. It had arrived from Boston on Delta Flight 1783 just before 9 a.m., one among hundreds of bags that passed through the terminal that day, except this one never found its owner. For nearly 24 hours, it remained untouched, slowly drawing attention as airport staff noticed the faint but unmistakable odor of decay. When TSA finally opened the case, they found a nightmare wrapped in plastic and bleach-saturated towels. The dismembered remains of 34-year-old Olivia Jane Mercer, a marketing executive from Boston who had been reported missing just hours before. The suitcase bore no printed tag, only a handwritten baggage slip that investigators would later discover was falsified. The man who checked it in wore a cap and glasses, avoiding cameras, but facial recognition software eventually identified him as Daniel Mercer, Olivia's husband of 8 years. The story Daniel gave police was simple. Olivia had boarded an early morning Lufthansa flight to Berlin for a tech convention and had likely lost her luggage in transit. But Lufthansa had no record of Olivia on any flight that day, and airport surveillance from Logan International showed something far more chilling. Danny arriving alone, wheeling 2 bags, with no sign of Olivia ever entering the terminal. To outsiders, Danny and Olivia seemed enviable. They lived in a modern loft in Boston's South End, vacationed in Spain the previous summer, and routinely posted polished photos that painted a portrait of a couple deeply in love. Olivia had recently been promoted to vice president at Tallymark, a rising star in tech marketing, while Danny, once an airline mechanic, had struggled for stability since losing his job in 2017, bouncing between short-term gigs and what friends described as consulting work no one really understood. Behind closed doors, the marriage had grown brittle. Friends of Olivia later told investigators that she had started voicing concerns about Danny's jealousy and resentment, particularly in light of her growing success and his financial dependence. In June 2019, she confided in her best friend, saying that she was considering divorce and had already begun drafting an exit strategy. There were no police reports of domestic violence, no known restraining orders, and no physical signs of abuse, but text messages retrieved from Olivia's phone, saved in the cloud and recovered during the investigation, revealed a chilling picture of emotional volatility and control. "He watches everything I do," she wrote in one unsent draft to herself. "But when I ask him where he's going, he shuts down. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." The Berlin trip was supposed to be her breather, 5 days to clear her head, attend panels, and quietly connect with a divorce attorney upon her return. She made travel arrangements independently, and even booked a separate hotel room from her colleagues. But she never made it to the airport. Surveillance from the evening of July 2nd captured her arriving home at 9:12 p.m. with Danny, carrying a red suitcase, the same one that would later turn up at JFK. That was the last confirmed sighting of Olivia Mercer alive. Neighbors in their apartment building reported hearing raised voices around 11 p.m., followed by a loud, disturbing thud. One neighbor later told police she considered calling security, but convinced herself it was just another argument. Danny told friends the next morning that Olivia had caught her flight, and he even posted a casual Instagram story of his breakfast, feigning normalcy. But Olivia's phone stopped transmitting location data around midnight, and the next activity traced to her account, an attempted but failed login, occurred on Danny's personal laptop at 2:47 a.m. In interviews after his arrest, Danny claimed that he merely helped Olivia load her bags curbside and kissed her goodbye. He insisted he had no idea what happened to her after that. But inconsistencies piled up. His story shifted subtly with each retelling. When asked what airline she flew, he said Lufthansa, then later said, maybe Delta. Investigators found it suspicious that he hadn't tried to contact her once she allegedly failed to check in with friends upon arrival in Berlin. He claimed he thought she was ignoring him, but Olivia never boarded any flight. Airport logs, rideshare receipts, and facial recognition searches found no evidence she was ever near Logan that day. Meanwhile, investigators traced Danny's own movements that morning. Phone data showed him driving from Boston to JFK in the early hours of July 3rd, returning by early afternoon. When police finally searched the Mercer apartment on July 6th, they found it meticulously cleaned, too meticulously. Trace amounts of blood were discovered in the bathroom grout and the shower drain, later confirmed through DNA analysis to belong to Olivia. A receipt in the trash dated July 1st showed purchases from Home Depot: bleach, heavy-duty plastic bags, duct tape, and an electric bone saw. Security footage from the store confirmed Danny had made the purchase alone. What started as a missing persons case was now a murder investigation, and the details that began to surface were not only gruesome but methodical, signs of planning, not panic. Olivia Mercer hadn't disappeared. She had been silenced, dissected, and nearly hidden forever inside the anonymity of an airport baggage claim. The suitcase that carried Olivia Mercer's dismembered remains was a red Samsonite model, medium-sized, scuffed at the corners, with a broken zipper pull and a faint smudge of what looked like dried bleach near the handle. It had arrived at JFK from Boston on the morning of July 3rd aboard Delta Flight 1783, a routine domestic route scheduled at 7:10 a.m., landing shortly after 8:30. Baggage handlers later testified that nothing about it had stood out. No alarms, no visible damage, no offensive smell at first. But by mid-afternoon, several employees began complaining of a rancid odor that seemed to be emanating from the area near Carousel 6. Airport protocol required that unclaimed luggage be placed in a secure storage area after a set period, but even there, the smell intensified. When TSA agents finally opened the bag at 9:17 a.m. on July 4th, they were overwhelmed by the scent of decomposition mingled with chemical cleanser. Inside, they found 2 large black trash bags, knotted tightly and sealed with duct tape. Beneath that, layers of plastic sheeting wrapped around what was unmistakably human remains, arms severed cleanly at the shoulders, legs disarticulated at the hips, and a torso with the head removed and placed in a separate section of the bag, wrapped in an additional towel. The remains were in relatively clean condition, suggesting an effort to wash away forensic evidence. An autopsy would later reveal bruising on the lower neck and petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, consistent with strangulation, as well as incision patterns indicating the use of a powered cutting tool. Fingerprint analysis on a partially preserved hand provided a match within hours. Olivia Mercer had been entered into the missing persons database that morning. Once the suitcase's contents were confirmed, the investigation rapidly escalated. A preliminary scan of baggage routing data showed the suitcase had been manually checked in at Logan Airport at 6:21 a.m. on July 3rd, just minutes before boarding closed for Delta 1783. The tag was handwritten on a replacement baggage slip, a detail that immediately drew suspicion. Logan's internal surveillance footage revealed the man who checked in the red suitcase was wearing a Red Sox cap pulled low, with prescription-style glasses and a loose gray hoodie. Despite the efforts at disguise, facial recognition software later matched him to Daniel Mercer. Investigators discovered he had driven from Boston to JFK in a rented Hyundai Tucson, which he returned at 3:04 p.m. that same day. Toll records, GPS logs, and gas station surveillance all corroborated his movements. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Danny initially claimed ignorance, stating he believed Olivia had traveled internationally and that the suitcase must have been stolen or misrouted. But inconsistencies began to compound. Lufthansa had no record of Olivia on any flight, and her passport hadn't been scanned at any checkpoint. More damning, a review of Delta's check-in logs showed that no other luggage was reported as lost under Olivia's name, and she was not listed as a passenger on any outbound flight that day. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the Mercer apartment, uncovering subtle but undeniable traces of blood in the bathroom tile grout and ceiling vent, visible only under luminol. In the hallway closet, they found a set of gloves and a used roll of plastic sheeting that matched the wrap found in the suitcase. The drain in the bathtub was partially clogged, and when analyzed, it was found to contain epithelial tissue fragments consistent with the decedent. A significant breakthrough came when police obtained search warrants for Danny's electronic devices. On his laptop, they discovered a deleted browsing history that had been partially recovered using forensic tools. Searches for "How long does it take for a body to decompose in plastic?", "Non-detectable poisons," and "How to destroy DNA." One disturbing query, timestamped just days before Olivia vanished, read, "If you put a body on a plane, will it be found?" Investigators also found a set of emails between Olivia and a divorce attorney, never sent but saved in her drafts folder. In one, dated June 29th, she described Danny as paranoid and emotionally manipulative, noting that he had access to all her passwords and had once installed a tracking app on her phone for her safety. She never mentioned physical violence, but she did say she felt like she was sleeping next to a loaded gun. Financial records revealed that Olivia had recently updated her will and increased her life insurance coverage to $500,000, with Danny listed as the sole beneficiary, a move that, while not suspicious at the time, now took on a grim significance. As the investigators built their timeline, they discovered that Danny had gone to Home Depot on July 1st and purchased an electric reciprocating saw, multiple bottles of bleach, garbage bags, duct tape, and a new set of plastic storage containers. Security footage showed him alone, methodically collecting each item before paying in cash. The items were not unusual in isolation, but together they painted a portrait of premeditation. When confronted with these findings, Danny's story began to shift. In his initial interview, he claimed Olivia left the apartment on her own that morning. Later, he suggested they had argued and that she had stormed out. Finally, when cornered with the forensic evidence and the GPS data, he admitted to disposing of her body, but insisted that her death had been accidental, that she had slipped in the bathroom and struck her head during a late-night fight. But the coroner's report told a different story. The ligature marks around Olivia's neck, the lack of cranial trauma, and the precise, calculated dismemberment made the idea of an accidental death implausible. Olivia Mercer's death was not the product of panic. It was the result of planning, resentment, and cold execution. Danny's efforts to cover it up by placing her remains in a suitcase and attempting to disguise it as lost luggage added a layer of calculated deceit that shocked even veteran homicide detectives. The deeper investigators looked, the clearer the picture became. Olivia had not vanished into thin air. She had been methodically erased by the person who claimed to love her most. The trial of Daniel Mercer began on October 5, 2020, in Suffolk County Superior Court, more than a year after Olivia's remains were discovered at JFK, and from the very first day, the courtroom was electric with tension. Reporters filled the gallery, and members of both families sat with rigid postures, separated by invisible but palpable lines of loyalty, disbelief, and grief. The prosecution presented its case with clinical precision, outlining a narrative built on a mountain of forensic evidence, digital footprints, and behavior that, in their words, could only point to a deliberate, premeditated homicide by a man consumed with resentment, entitlement, and the looming threat of abandonment. They showed the jury images of the suitcase, the bleach purchases, and security footage of Danny at Home Depot and at Logan Airport. They brought in crime scene experts who testified to the improbability of Olivia's death being accidental, citing the lack of injuries consistent with a fall, the post-mortem dismemberment, and the efforts to clean and conceal the body as signs not of panic, but of planning. Olivia's best friend, Maya Delgado, testified through tears, describing their last phone call, during which Olivia had expressed fear that Danny would never let her go quietly. Perhaps most chilling was the digital forensics expert who walked the jury through Danny's deleted search history, showing the jurors how he had scoured the internet for disposal methods, DNA destruction, and the feasibility of moving a body through airport security, all weeks before Olivia's disappearance. The defense, for its part, tempted to argue that the death was not murder, but a tragic accident compounded by poor judgment and emotional collapse. They suggested that Danny had snapped under the pressure of a deteriorating marriage, mounting financial stress, and a deeply rooted fear of abandonment, and that his post-mortem actions, while horrific, were not premeditated murder but the result of a disassociated state. They presented no witnesses on Danny's behalf other than a psychologist who had evaluated him post-arrest and suggested he exhibited signs of borderline personality disorder and emotional dysregulation, though even that expert conceded under cross-examination that such traits did not preclude intent. Danny himself took the stand in what some legal analysts later called a fatal misstep. His testimony was halting, inconsistent, and at times evasive. When asked why he never called 911 after Olivia's alleged fall, he said he froze. When asked why he dismembered her body, he said he couldn't bear to see her like that. When confronted with the bleach, the saw, and the suitcase, He visibly flinched but maintained that he was trying to keep her safe, even in death. A statement that drew audible gasps from the gallery. On November 17, 2020, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder, with special circumstances for concealment and abuse of a corpse. The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later, where Olivia's mother, Judith Mercer, no relation to Danny, delivered a victim impact statement so raw and visceral that even the judge appeared shaken. She described Olivia as brilliant, radiant, and finally becoming the woman she was meant to be, and called Danny a coward who couldn't stand to watch a strong woman rise without dragging her into the dirt. Danny was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and was remanded immediately to MCI Cedar Junction in Walpole. In the months that followed, the case became a touchstone in conversations about emotional abuse, coercive control, and the dangers of invisible violence in seemingly picture-perfect relationships. Olivia's employer, Tallymark, established a scholarship fund in her name to support women in tech leadership roles, and her story was later cited in a Massachusetts legislative proposal to expand the legal definition of domestic violence to include psychological and financial manipulation. To this day, what haunts many who followed the case isn't just the brutality of the crime, but how ordinary the warning signs had seemed in hindsight: possessiveness masked as protectiveness, silence disguised as composure, and devotion that was really dominance. Olivia Mercer was not killed in a fit of rage, nor as part of some explosive confrontation. She was killed, investigators concluded, in a cold, quiet moment, perhaps while brushing her teeth or getting ready for bed, by the one person she had once believed would be her partner for life. And for nearly 48 hours, her killer walked free, posting breakfast photos and smiling for the camera, while her body sat in a suitcase that he hoped the world would simply lose and forget.